My name is Claire Ramjan. I am one of the Centre for Teaching Excellence hub for rural education and learning for sustainability, and we are all represented here. We have Sarah, we have Michelle, and we are really excited to host so many of you here this evening. So thank you very much for joining us. So we are really delighted to welcome Professor Morag Redford and Anne Patterson, and also Dr. Helen Coker is on the presentation there as well. And they are going to hopefully inspire you and engage you, ask you good questions, prompt your thinking all about the ways of teaching within rural schools and multi-composite classrooms. I'll let them introduce themselves properly, but we're so delighted to have both of you here today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Claire. We're delighted to be here and to reach such a wide audience across Scotland. It's a great opportunity to have this hub and to be able to share some of our work with you. I'm Morag Redford, recently retired as Head of Teacher Education at the University of the Highlands and Islands, and I'm joined today by my colleague Anne Patterson, who has a variety of hats, but also, well, is currently still working at the University of the Highlands and Islands. So we're presenting from there today. We did this work with Helen Coker, who unfortunately can't be with us. Helen, until recently, worked at the University of Dundee, also in teacher education. What we want to do this afternoon is to present work that the three of us did together in stages, to tell you what we did and why we did it, but importantly to give lots of time to talk about what we found out about practice and resources in particular when teaching composite classes. And I'm going to start with that, and then Anne will talk about schools, the communities, and also we want to ask questions about the future for small schools. We've built in spaces for comments, discussion, and as we talk, we really want to celebrate the unique features of rural schools, particularly the small ones, and the importance of community and place. Having started, I've realised that we may be joined by people from elsewhere who are perhaps not as familiar with the term composite classes that we use in Scotland. And across Europe and the rest of the world, the term multigrade is used. And when we published this work recently in an article, that's how that's where it sat in relation to what's called multigrade teaching. And I'm sure those of you with responsibility of composite classes can think, oh yes, I can relate to that word too. So we got an opportunity to write particularly about teaching in composite classes. And what we wanted to do was to observe and analyse, these are our two aims here, how teachers interact with each other and their environment in that situation, and also to explore individual journeys in relation to multi-composite classrooms. Why people were teaching there, how long they'd been teaching multi-composite classes, how it related to their professional practice, their professional career development. Really quite big questions. So this work had quite a short time scale. So what we did was we used data, information we'd collected on previous research projects. So to understand that, I think it's important that those of you who haven't had the opportunity to meet any of us, know that we've all taught in schools and universities in rural Scotland for a long time now. We have a breadth of experience and background teaching in schools, working in local authorities, working in universities, particularly in relation to teaching in rural areas and teaching in composite classes. We had all done work previously in very different research projects between 2017 and 2023, so it stretched out a bit, but what we wanted to do was use work that we'd done with student teachers, with probationers, those in their induction year officially, with teachers themselves and with head teachers, all of them working in rural areas as defined by the Scottish Government, and all teaching composite classes. So what we then did was we asked new questions of the data that we had, and by doing that, because I suppose I should say first, we knew that everyone that we talked to in individual interviews and in focus groups had talked about the experience of teaching composite classes. So what we wanted to do was ask new questions of the data and pull out what we'd already collected about composite classes. And in particular, to look at that across the lifetime of a professional career. So altogether, we had data from 49 teachers or aspiring teachers across 8 rural authorities. And what we did was we looked at the data through the lens of ecological agency, which I'll come to next, and with a particular focus on using portraits, which is a type of ethnographic research that let us paint a picture of the role of the community and place in the professional journey of teachers. The outcome was quite tangled up. We got information about teacher agency, a lot about multi-composite classrooms, and a lot about innovative practice. Some of you may have come across this framework before. It comes from a piece of work that was led by Mark Priestley in the University of Stirling 10 years ago now, and he and a small team did work in central Scotland where they looked at the professional journey of teachers and their professional learning. So if you look at the 3 boxes on screen, the first box is about what people bring with them when they're, if you're looking over a lifetime when they're coming into teaching. Then the experience box in the middle, what they're doing, where they exercise agency, what they actually do when teaching, and then projective, where they might go. So we were able to take this framework and ask questions of each of the data sets we had. So for example, I worked with the data I'd collected from student teachers and looked at what they'd brought in, about the experience they were getting in relation to composite classes and teaching composite classes, and where they thought they would take that experience. So what we did to start with was take the data from the 4 projects with the rural context and the composite classes binding the teachers together, and re-examine the data. Excuse me. So I just wanted to stop at this point and ask if anyone had any questions. The picture is from one of the campaigns in Shetland when I was working in UHI to keep open a school on Yell. Just ask if anyone has any questions or comments they want to make about what we were doing. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Any of the chairs want to tell me if anyone's got a hand up?
I can't see anyone at the moment. I can see lots of people introducing themselves in the chat, which is wonderful. Please, everyone, that continue to do that. But no questions at the moment. So if anyone has anything that they would like to add in there, please do that just now, or stick a wee yellow hand onto your screen for us so we can see you.
Morag, I think it's maybe quite useful to say that the way we tackled this research allowed us to really use the data again and again, didn't it? You know, we are aware that there is little research has taken place in Scotland around multi-composite classes, and we felt that actually to be able to reuse the data, if you like, in a new way was really helpful.
It was really important for us because not all our work had previously been published. For example, the work I did with the student teachers was about informing practice within the courses we were running. It wasn't about writing something up and publishing it. Other pieces of work, particularly the research Helen did with curriculum, had been published. So there were small pieces of work in different places. And this for us, as Anne's saying, is absolutely about working with what we had and bringing it to a wider audience and making more use of it.
We do have a hand. So it's Anik. Anik Jameson, if you want to just unmute yourself and ask your question, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, I'm surprised to see you campaigning in Yell. I know that community from 15 years ago teaching water sports there. It's such a strong community and so dependent on the school with plenty of children. So it's surprising to see they were having to campaign to keep it open. Thanks.
It was from some time ago. I'm not quite sure. I mean, up to 10 years ago, possibly. It was when there was there were proposals within Shetland as a local authority to close quite a lot of the small schools, and I think it was just about this was well, you can recognise the street. This was in Lerwick, so this was just an event to give support to the small schools, but it was some time ago. But yes, yeah, which brings the point about there's, you know, sometimes there's lots of children there and sometimes it depends on where you are, sometimes there aren't. And the future of small schools is something we'll come back to later. Well, Anne in particular will come back to, so thank you. That's great. Just interesting to get reflections from people, because we do have people from, it was lovely to see everyone introducing themselves in the chat, as you said, yes, well, people from across the country. Right, so I'm going to come back to our data. And what we did with it, we used the framework that I showed you and analysed the data that we had. And there were 3 areas that came out, 3 themes that came out across the board. So for absolutely everyone, student teacher through to head teacher, each of the groups that we had, they talked about the craft of teaching. Now, we included pedagogy, classroom organisation, the curriculum, absolutely everything within that, because it was the core part of what people talked about in relation to teaching in composite classes. Resources we sat separately because there was quite a bit about resources, and a really important theme that came out was the rural school as a community and as part of a community. Across the data itself, relationships were another theme that came out. Relationships situated within the school and within the wider community. And that theme in particular let us look in detail at the professional journey of teachers. I'm going to look at the craft of teaching and resources, and then Anne's going to back to the school as the rural community. Going through this chronologically, starting with the early career teachers, so those who were student teachers and who were in their first year, in their probation year. There was a lot of comment from the students about differentiation, and the probationers in particular talked about, the ones we were working with talked about knowledge they brought from placements in multi-composite classes and their opportunity then to really develop an understanding of specific contexts for learning and to be innovative and responsive in their teaching. All of which is quite important as practice knowledge that they were then taking with them as they were looking into the next part of their teaching journey, this group. For the experienced teachers, the main point made across the board was about the challenge of teaching all curriculum levels. There were quite a few comments about times when they taught the class together and when other times, there's a quote in here, so the children got really good high quality time with me when using small groups. Other teachers talked about focusing their day through health and well-being. And we gathered quite a lot of information about the way teachers supported the resilience of the children in the multi-composite class through the way that they structured the day and the way that they focused the curriculum when they were teaching. There was a lot of information about the level of responsibility teachers felt that they had and the importance of having confidence in their own professional judgment because they were teaching a multi-composite class and because they were teaching across all curriculum levels. So we're not here coming with details of, well, I used this pedagogy, I used this approach here or that maths scheme there or whatever. What we've come back with from the data that we've collected are, in a sense, higher level statements about the experience that reflects on, oh, well, I've done this and I've done that. But what it has done is helped us understand the key points at each stage of the professional journey. So there are areas, and I think the hub team here perhaps need to take note of this, but the areas where it would be useful to have more input in relation to professional learning, opportunities to share experiences with colleagues to support professional development. I'll let you read this quote from experienced teachers. We saw this reflection also in comments about the need to plan the curriculum over a longer period because the class will remain with you for several years. The projective comments of teachers, so the ones where they're looking forward to the next things they'll be doing or perhaps a next class, very much focused on the impact of digital innovation on the curriculum and the challenges of meeting curriculum outcomes for the children in a composite situation. When we looked at the data from the head teachers, they commented in particular on the way they developed their craft of teaching through a range of experience across teaching several different multi-composite classes. And they also talked very much about the challenges of being a teaching head teacher in a small school, teaching a multi-composite class and leading the school. Something I think Anne will come back to. When we looked at resources, the information that we pulled out there under this theme was really quite quite interesting. It moved in a chart from the panic of the student teachers who didn't know what to do if the interactive whiteboard didn't work. And then the organisational challenge for the probationers, the amount of planning and thinking and organising, and did they have resources from here or there? And an interesting comment across the group of experienced teachers about the way that they bundled the curriculum and had to adapt teaching schemes which were set, but as you will read here, were set for a single year group. So I'm still teaching to the curriculum, but I've moved everything around to work for me, and that is a challenge. Another challenge in rural schools was about equity and access to resources. And in some situations, examples of a lack of equity of access, as this quote gives us. And also, of course, transport costs if the school wanted to go somewhere to take the children to experience something. So here, for example, we have a loss of an additional support needs teacher who's gone off on maternity leave and hasn't been replaced. And the challenge of working with the children in a composite teaching situation. I can see there's been a bit of chat, so I'll just have a look and see if there's anything that we...
I think there's a useful one there, Morag, around the you know, the training at universities don't cater for teachers working in rural schools.
Yes, that's very true. It's something that we try to future and past tense here, but when I was working in UHI, we very much tried to specialise in and ensure that when we were teaching, particularly in relation to the curriculum, resources and pedagogy, that we actually at that point said, well, and this is how you could do this if you have a primary 2, 3, 4, if you have a 1, 2, 3, if you have whatever, and the need to begin to build that. I think even in UHI, where our students are spread all across the north and west, it's still often quite difficult to get placement experience in composite classes, particularly multi-composites, because the small schools don't have the capacity, the very small schools don't have the capacity always to take students. But yes, really important. And I think Anne and I have been on this hobby horse for a long time now, something that we do wish that the other universities that offer teaching education qualifications would actually think about a wee bit more.
Yeah, and in fairness, interestingly, this year I was invited to Strathclyde to give a keynote to the newly qualified teachers or almost newly qualified teachers around rural education. So I think there's something there that we in rural need to get our voice out and be able to really plug what's happening. So there's another plug, Sarah.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm just noticing some final comments here about the, yes, limited ASN provision if you're further away from a bigger centre of population, and the costs. Yes, £25 a head for transport to swimming. Munlochy and Tor, gosh, and that's not that far away from swimming, so that's dreadful. And relying on parent councils to be proactive and help fundraise. And the lottery to a certain extent of it all, again from Munlochy and Tor, but to have a day a week from an ASN teacher, but we've had, I'll just quote Kate, hope you don't mind, but for many years we've had little or no ASN input. So it's the balance, it's importantly, the need for not just our employing local authorities, but importantly, national recognition and national frameworks to recognise the needs of rural schools and those teaching in rural schools, particularly in multi-composite situations. Thank you everyone for the comments. I'm going to hand over now to Anne, but I think I hold the magic button, so I'll mute myself and go on to the next slide.
Okay, thank you very much, Morag. And I am aware of time, so I won't take too long so that it provides opportunity for discussion, because you are the people that are actually needing the opportunity to network as well. So our next section that we're going to look at is the rural school as a community. And we know that all schools are communities. We know that they're communities in their particular place. You just move on more of the slide. But I think what's really important, and it certainly came through in the data that we looked at, is how important the rural place actually is. And the space is the location, and the place gives the space its meaning and personality. So actually being in each of your particular schools, you are all rural schools, you are all unique, you are all different because of that community and that space that is around everyone. And that relationship between the space and the place and the community is really important. We've had somebody already talk about how the Parent Council actually supports. We really pulled out, what does it mean to be part of the school community for teachers and leaders? There's a bit of that challenge of being known and knowing about your life history, but there's also that position that you, as part of that community, sometimes know more about parents than you particularly want to as well. And it's about how all of that is managed. There's that support that comes from the community, but there also can be a challenge. We know, and some of the data actually really supported this, that when things are going really well in the community, when the community is really with you and with the school, the rural school thrives. But when you can have one or two discerning voices within the community, that can quickly really, cut into the life of the school. What was really essential was cluster working and networking, and being able to find your tribe, if you like, be able to actually work with other colleagues in similar situations. And sometimes clusters are put together and you may be the only small rural school in that cluster. But that's where there's opportunities of taking the network wider and looking for schools that are similar to your own. There can be the view of other colleagues. This was a quote that a head teacher had made to me about when she'd taken up the post in a small rural school. There was 2 classes, and a colleague said to her, "What are you doing, woman? I would never take on that role in 100 years. So there's something there about the perception of what a rural school is like. And yes, it's busy. We all know that. I like to refer to it as flexible leadership, because by golly, you have to be flexible in your leadership. The big issue is staffing of rural schools, and actually part of that comes from our staffing complements, where a rural school may have a part-time job, and again, it's about who wants to be in that part-time job, and actually the distances that people may travel or may not travel to supporting the school for part-time hours, whether that be teacher or classroom assistant or a clerical assistant even. What was really interesting was the view around curriculum and curriculum. Morag picked that up earlier as part of the craft of teaching, but that the place really actually impacts on how you meet national policy. And I'm sure those of you on board will be tonight will be very aware of how you can have someone, an expert in the community, arrive and say, I'd like to do crocheting with you and your school. And I know I've been in that position and thinking, all right, crocheting. Okay, I didn't actually have that in the curriculum. How can I get it in? Because you don't want to offend, but we also know our curriculums are so tight that we have to make the maximum time of it. This is a quote from some literature that the thisness of particular schools means that factors may come together to cause educational disadvantage in distinct ways. But as well as the disadvantage, there actually can be opportunities there. And I think that that's something that we brought forward. Now, there's a lot in that slide, and hopefully late after today, you'll be able to kind of think around some of these things. And Morag and I are not disappearing, and we're happy to be contacted around anything that we've talked about tonight. Okay, Morag, thank you. So the community impact on teacher agency was something we were really keen to look at. All these factors that we talked about in the previous slide, how did they impact on teacher agency and the professional going forward? So the data-based newly qualified teachers, their data was very much placed in the present, where they were at the moment, and they had concerns around confidentiality, the small town connections, so that, for example, the cook maybe was the granny of some of the children, and these kind of connections. And when you're brand new, you want to be able to make sure that you're not putting your foot directly into it. What's the living in a rural community? What's the pros and the cons there of that? But they had no clear evidence coming through from their data about how they thought this experience in a small rural school would impact on their future. When we went to mid-career or more experienced teachers, they were again very much based in the present, and parental communication and good relationships there were very important for them as to how that helped them to take forward the job of teaching and learning and teaching. But when we came to the head teachers, they had the practical evaluative of what was actually happening and driving the curriculum forward, but they were also very aware that each of their schools was unique. So they couldn't just lift something from another small rural school where maybe a helpful quality improvement officer had come and said, another small school's doing this. It didn't always fit. It wasn't the same match to it. And they also thought about the future. One of the quotes, and I'm using this in my current research, she felt, the head teacher, that she was a school at the end of the road. And that was both geographically and in a sense of being at the end of the road. It was the last school that was kind of thought about. I'm just going to take a quick pause there if anybody wants to come in on anything. I haven't been watching the feed there. My hands have been too busy doing other things, I'm afraid. But I don't know if there's anything, Sarah, that you want to pick up on that somebody said.
I'm seeing that quite a number of comments about that sort of position when staff are also parents.
Yeah.
and privilege to you know, information that other parents wouldn't necessarily have because they don't work in the staff, the cluster. So that's very interesting, and also my experience of when I was a rural head teacher here in Dumfries and Galloway. That was, you know, the staff that work within the school, whether it was the janitor or the you know, the person that helped with the lunches, or our supply staff that visited, they were also parents of the school, and that then becomes a bonus but a challenge at the same time. I think, you know, it's got both sides to it. So I was struck by those comments, and also I don't know if John Naples Campbell, if you would come on, if you'd be prepared to come on the mic. You made a very interesting reflection about the curriculum and staffing link.
Yeah.
The other end.
Hi there, everyone. So I'm the head teacher of a 3 to 18 campus. But we're the smallest high school S1 to S6 in Scotland. We've got 28 pupils, and I've got to be really, really creative about my curriculum and what we can offer. Our S1 and S2 pupils are together, S3, S4 are together, and S5 and S6. But how do I offer a curriculum that's like relevant, robust, that's contemporary, that is engaging, when I only have 9 staff members? Not all of them are dual qualified in various subjects. I think that's another thing about initial teacher training. They need to start thinking about. So I've got to be very, very creative, and I love it, and I love my school and my community. I'm an openly gay Jewish man, and I've been welcomed into this tiny little part of Scotland. It's been amazing, but I feel sometimes that I'm just not getting it right for my pupils who have to travel 2.5 hours to go to the nearest swimming pool, or seeing what my niece and my nephew are getting in Edinburgh and then looking at us, and it's just really, really unfair. So I've got to be very, very creative. I managed to pull in the local chef of the local restaurant to come in and do our hospitality class. So that's been taken by a business studies teacher, but the local chef does all the cooking, which is amazing. We've got a course on maritime skills that we work with local fishermen, and we use our school lock. Our PE is all paddleboarding and outdoor swimming and canoeing, which is great. So it is all about being creative, but it's also about having good staff members as well and good teaching, and we don't always get the applicants because we're so remote. So yeah, I'm absolutely loving this conversation, so thank you. But it's given me a lot of food for thought as well.
Excellent, thank you. And just so much you've said there chimes with me. And I'm on a phase just now of you said about what others are getting and ours aren't. Let's flip that. What are yours getting that others aren't? You know, I think we need to sort of build up the rural voice around that. Lorna.
Sorry, I'm just grappling with my buttons here. Hi, Anne, lovely to see you. You too.
Hi, Lorna.
No, I really just want to totally agree with what you were saying there. As I'm listening to this, and my work as an attainment advisor with Highland and Shetland, it was lovely that Morag, you started with the benefits of working in a multi-composite and rural school. And I think that importance of the school has been such a big part of the community. And John, please be reassured, you obviously know your children, young people and community so well. And it sounds like you're providing relevant experiences and opportunities that they need, and that's what Curriculum for Excellence is all about. And also just wanted to say that you know, teachers I've worked with who teach in multi-composite, they also understand progression and obviously differentiation really, really well, and I think that's to be commended too. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorna. Lovely to see you. Okay, thanks. I'm going to move on because I'm aware of time. An area that started to come through, and it's something that, again, Morgan, Helen and I would like, the spin-offs we would like to do from this research, and certainly the sustainability aspect. I think there's no doubt that particularly the head teachers were concerned around what the sustainability of the small rural schools was in going forward. There are financial challenges, there are staffing challenges. There was mentioned about shared headships, where there was actually someone had said they had been approached to do 5 schools. Now, is that physically possible? And how can we take that forward? There was issues around the leadership of these small rural schools being valued, because there, again, many people will see, well, that's a good place for you to start for your headship. Now, I would argue against it, that it is the most complex headship to take forward, but yet, it seemed to be the easiest place to start. Big conversations about viability. When does the school become viable and when does it not become viable? And again, there's no one answer to that, because if you're the only school for 20 miles and there are only 3 children, then it still has to be viable, because the 20 miles is a long way. This quote I really liked. It came across from a head teacher group that I worked with, who said, we need to be allowed to work differently regarding policy making, and there needs to be a change. And John, I think that resonates exactly what you were saying. And you absolutely do need to be able to look at that differently. Now, I'm just going to ask Maura if we can whiz the next slide, and I'll say that there is a really good paper here about rural schools under pressure. Part of it covers, and I can send that on to Sarah if we want to include it. But it really brings in all of the things that we had talked about earlier and as part of our research. But I quite like the way that it's there for everybody to think not only about the challenges, but also the opportunities that are there. Okay, so I'm finishing a piece of research that will be part of my doctorate, and an important part of it coming through is rural voice. And we need to be able to have our agency heard and have an agentic voice coming forward to be able to feed into all of the new policies and practices that are actually happening. They tend to happen at an urban level. They tend to happen in, for us in Scotland, more towards Central Belt, but we need to make sure that our voices are heard. And I suppose that's maybe a challenge that I want to leave with everybody tonight. How do you get your voice heard of the wonderful work, the really good work that happens in our small schools and in multi-composite classes? How, and I suppose, what would support you in actually feeling agentic about what you do in these multi-composite classes? We do have the final, we'll leave the next slide, Morag, but just go to the final one. And I think maybe it's the opportunity here to think about some of the reflections we've had in the findings there, that kind of challenge point of how do you feel confident to be agentic about what you do is what I'd like to leave you with. And I'll hand back to Maura.
Thank you, Anne. We're particularly keen, have the photo here from Salmorostig, where I've chosen to spend the first year of my retirement learning Gaelic. And a small school visiting Salmore, our National Gaelic College. Our discussion, we hope, or the research that we've done raises issues. We want to work with you to support you to develop your practice, your agency on that professional journey, and absolutely to discuss with you the opportunities for professional learning for teachers in rural Scotland. So thank you for listening to us, and please tell us what you think and your ideas. I can see quite a lot in the chat already.
Lots of really, really good comments come through, which is super. It's going to give us lots of food for thought. And I think to both of you, I think it's made me reflect on my time as a rural school head teacher down here in Dumfries and Galloway, and that I went from 1 class to 2 class. You're spinning those plates with a P1 to 7. How are you doing that as a teaching head teacher and managing the community, and rocking up to the community meetings that you end up attending, whether it's the community council, and how can I build those relationships to benefit the school, and it's just there's so many aspects to it. And I think you nailed it when you said flexibility is really key working in rural settings. You just need to be able to adapt, and that creativity, like you were saying, the resources coming in very sort of prescriptive stages, and thinking, right, okay, I have got P1 to 7 here. That's not going to work for me. How am I going to use bits of it and adapt all the time? So much of what you said was really just took me back a couple of years to the time in school. So thank you for helping me reflect, for sure. So what we'd really love is that if you have any immediate ideas. I know somebody had asked if we were going to be building on this and looking for ways to create community and professional learning opportunities, and absolutely we would love to do that. And if you've got any ideas of what you feel you need in terms of professional learning, then please do let us know in the chat, because that would be really interesting for us to start capturing that too. I think Deirdre, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Be brave here and speaking. It was myself that I put that in there. And I'm just thinking some of the points that have been raised, and I know you've talked about, at ITE level with, I was trained at Glasgow University. I did get a final placement back in my home area in Fort William. I had come through. The reason I'm in primary education was I was in a very small rural village school, and still, my primary 1 to 4 teacher is still a very good friend. My mother was a teacher in the school within that. It's so, there is so many positive, but I do agree, people coming in, and I think it is, I would say, possibly, those that are maybe doing their teacher training through Gaelic medium will get more of an experience of doing placements within multi-composite classes, unless they're doing it in the city schools, the bigger town and city schools, because they're very big schools nowadays. But supporting particularly people early in their career, or when they have moved, they've maybe decided, we had a few teachers particularly, do want to move to a more rural setting, but it's the change in, it's not the same. You haven't got the privacy. And I'm one of the ones that's a parent within the school, as teaching your own children, etc. within that. And your colleagues are also, the teacher you're respecting and trusting your little people within that. But I think looking at that, and you're trying to support and, doing your other teachers from the school that have maybe been there longer, but supporting new people coming in who have maybe had experiences of a couple of years within a sort of bigger town, and like, oh yeah, I've done composite, I've had, a 1-2. It's very different if you're then thrown into a 1-7 class, and as part of a cluster, you've not always got, the head teacher, the deputy head on site, all the time, things like that. And I think a lot of, the staff we work with would appreciate, when you do, there's training, within Highland, we are, really fortunate, and a lot of recordings of training. And, there was things put in, when they do the curriculum or rationale that came from Highland many years back, and they did try to bundle it and do it in a 3-year cycle, so you weren't repeating things when you had the same children for years on years. But there's still how do you actually balance that? Yes, you can teach addition to the whole class, but when you've got the ones that are maybe just recognizing, counting out objects like that, to the ones that are working with their addition and subtraction with their decimals, etc., all within the one class, this juggling, and different people. Some people find that stations, etc., work, having play incorporated, but for others it can actually, it's like, this really isn't working my setting. And it's so refreshing to hear that, saying, oh, this really works, I saw this in this school. It's not going to work in all settings. Not all classrooms are set up, not all buildings are the same acoustics, so on and so forth. So I think, and even the chance for staff, we're really fortunate that our ASG incorporates the small L's. I see there's someone from Egg, etc., as well today, and we do try to link up, particularly our very, very small, like our 1-7 composites, and working together. But I think having a wider reach in that, as you're saying, networking can be a very strong, powerful tool for our professional development, but also looking at, every year when it comes to the term, the whole of the area has to do, their health education, their RSHP at the same time, because there is no way you can deliver what you're meant to teach to all of them across, within the class setting. And how do you go about doing, things like that? And you muddle through and find the things. But I really do think the amount of people here tonight, I think, reflects that there is people wanting this.
They were all looking.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, it was a kind of comment about the kind of differentiation in primary, which I think, as a 3 to 18 head teacher, I think our primary colleagues are amazing at doing composite classes, and really thrive at getting it right for every child in their classroom. My concern, I suppose, is when we get to SQA, and we have such a small amount of teaching staff, and when we get in kind of the Education Scotland come in to look at what we're doing, there is a kind of fear that we need to still have a Nat 5 class. We need to have a higher class. We need to have a kind of MPA class. And I'm just kind of curious if any of the panel speakers know, with the new SQA model coming out, the new Scottish Qualifications model, has rural input been thought about? Are they thinking, because this one size fits all doesn't work with us, and SQA are very, I might be speaking out of turn here, I do apologize, but are very bad at kind of doing that one size fits all, and it really doesn't work for us. There's no way I can have teachers. I mean, I know I'm talking about a class of maybe 5 pupils, but teachers in that one teacher teaching Nat 4, Nat 5 higher, as well as an NPA, workload, as we know, is huge. It's a huge issue with the kind of unions, and I'm just wondering if rural schools are being spoken about, and it's being looked at with this new qualifications authority board, whatever it's called now.
I think the honest answer to that, since you've been honest, John, the honest answer to that is we're not really going to know until it's all published. And I think the rural voices have certainly been raised, And to be honest, what the issue of teaching all these different levels is not just it's not just it's an issue across the board. Unless you're in a very, very big school. It's also an issue for colleges with SQA awards. So I think, unfortunately, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. There are a number of changes going on now with the SQA, possibly with Education Scotland, that we're all kind of just waiting to see what happens, which is why I feel very strongly that it's important that the rural voice is heard. The more we can raise the rural voice, and Anne's referred a few times to research. I'm hoping that Anne's going to take her thesis and hit some people over the head with it shortly.
Absolutely.
You know, the more hopefully the national policy, and I'm kind of covering everything with that, SQA curriculum, everything, will actually consider the number of schools and the number of classrooms in the country that don't fit with this. I have a year group of this and I can teach at this level here, and my neighbour next door is going to teach that level. So we need to publicise rural schools.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just endorse what Morag has said there. I don't know about the hitting over the head right enough. That could be when I see how many pages there are. Anyway, I think that we have a duty ourselves to turn the tables, and we need to be agentic ourselves. You know, we need to accept we're doing a good job. We're doing a very good job, guys. And we need to be able to share that and not kind of think we're the school at the end of the road.
I'm going to step in. Kate, if your question or comment is super short, I'm going to ask you to say it, but we are literally almost on time, and I don't want to keep people any later.
I will try and be brief.
Succinct.
I've been teaching for for quite a long time, and have been in rural teaching in a multi-composite now for about 6 years. But I really enjoy the freedom of teaching in multi-composite in a tiny school. I don't mind being forgotten, actually, because I kind of feel like I can do what I want. But I feel like I can be very creative, and we do really fantastic projects because I can't really repeat things, you know, so we do lots of different, and it keeps it new and it keeps it fresh. And I find that quite exciting for me, and we get to do really cool things. And my kids are in a school not too far away, but it's a much bigger school, and they're always very jealous of the things that we get to do. And so that's my comment.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We are on time, and so I would just firstly like to reiterate what Sarah said. Please put your comments into the chat. We will keep the chat, and we will kind of build that into a summary of the comments and the suggestions that you're making. So if there are things that you would like professional inquiry or CPL, the letters for training in the future, we've seen outdoor learning mentioned there, we've seen learning for sustainability, all of those different things. It would be great for us to be able to build those sessions going forward that are what you need, what you would like, and all the kind of strands that really build that positivity in this network. So firstly, thank you so much for all of you for coming along, and a huge thank you to Anne and Morag for sharing your research with us and being so inspirational on a very dark Wednesday evening.